Cities used to run on concentration. People concentrated in offices, money concentrated in downtowns, retail concentrated around foot traffic, transit concentrated around commuting patterns, housing value concentrated around access to work. That was the old urban logic. The city worked because daily movement followed a predictable rhythm. People came in, worked, bought lunch, used transport, filled offices, supported shops, paid rent for proximity, and repeated the cycle again the next day. But that rhythm broke, not all at once, not everywhere equally, and not permanently in the same way, but enough changed that cities no longer work the way they used to. That is the shift. Not that cities stopped mattering, but that the systems that made them function for decades are no longer aligned in the same way. When people talk about city decline, they often reduce it to one thing: crime, remote work, housing costs, politics, commercial real estate, public disorder. Each of those can matter, but the deeper change is more structural. Cities are not only places, they are coordination systems. They depend on flows: workers, commuters, tenants, consumers, delivery systems, public revenue, business demand, and time. Once those flows change, the city changes with them. That means the real story is not are cities good or bad? It is what happens when the old coordination model weakens. That is the question now. Because cities were built around assumptions that no longer hold as strongly as they once did. For a long time, downtowns functioned as economic engines. They concentrated jobs, services, finance, government, retail, and status. That concentration made cities productive. A dense core meant more encounters, shorter distances, more transit use, more lunch traffic, more office demand, more business services, and more demand for nearby real estate. That made downtowns powerful, not because every city center was glamorous, but because density created economic spillover. A worker in an office tower did not only support the employer, that worker also supported cafes, transit systems, dry cleaners, bars, convenience stores, food delivery, street retail, and commercial landlords. This is what made the city ecosystem work. It was never just one building. It was the web around the building. One of the biggest breaks in that system was remote work. Not because everyone left forever, but because enough people stopped showing up every day that the economic map shifted. That matters. If workers commute less often, downtown demand falls unevenly but meaningfully. Less lunch spending, less transit usage, less office traffic, less after-work activity, less incidental retail, less pressure to live near the office, less value in daily proximity. This does not mean cities disappear. It means the city's old pattern of dependence weakens. And once daily commuting becomes less universal, the businesses and property systems built around that rhythm start absorbing the shock. That is a major reason cities feel different now. The center no longer pulls as consistently as it once did. Office buildings used to represent certainty. A company leased space. Workers filled it. The district around it benefited. Landlords earned rent. Cities earned taxes. Transit systems carried the flow. That model still exists, but it is weaker. Now office demand is less predictable. Some firms reduced space. Some went hybrid. Some delayed decisions. Some moved to smaller footprints. Some still want premium space, while lower-tier buildings struggle more. That creates a split. The best offices may still attract tenants, but large parts of the older office market can become harder to fill, harder to finance, and harder to justify at old values. That matters because city economies were heavily tied to the certainty of office demand. Once that certainty weakens, the rest of the urban system starts repricing around it. Big structural change often shows up first at street level. A tower may still stand tall, but what happens downstairs changes faster. Fewer people walking in, less lunchtime volume, more empty storefronts, more fragile service businesses, less predictable daily demand. That is why cities can look open while feeling economically thinner. The visible core remains, but the supporting layer weakens. That supporting layer matters more than people think, Because urban life depends on recurring small transactions, coffee, lunch, transit swipes, quick errands, impulse purchases, after-work visits, regular service use. When those small flows weaken at scale, the city does not collapse dramatically. It just loses density of activity. And activity density is one of the main things that made cities economically powerful in the first place. Cities also changed because housing and work are no longer tied together in the same way. For decades, proximity to downtown employment was one of the main reasons urban real estate held such power. Live near work, commute faster, stay connected to opportunity, pay for access. That logic still matters in some places, but it matters less universally now. If work becomes more flexible, then distance gets repriced. A worker may tolerate living farther out. A family may choose space over proximity. A company may hire outside the traditional urban core. A neighborhood once considered too far may become more acceptable. This does not lower all housing pressure. In some places, it simply redistributes it, but it does change the urban equation. Because when daily office presence weakens, the premium attached to certain locations no longer behaves exactly the same way. That reshapes both demand and identity. Transit depends on rhythm. It works best when large numbers of people move predictably across time and place. Morning rush, evening rush, dense weekday flows, reliable commuter volume. When that pattern weakens, transit economics get harder. Ridership becomes less predictable. Peak demand softens. Revenue pressure rises. Service decisions get more difficult. That matters because transit is not just transport. It is one of the systems that makes large cities usable. If transit weakens, access changes. If access changes, commuting changes. If commuting changes, district value changes. This is why urban systems are so interdependent. The office does not only affect the office. It affects the train, the street, the store, the rent, and the city budget. So when people say cities feel different, part of what they are sensing is a disruption in coordination. The systems no longer reinforce each other as cleanly. This is one of the most discussed parts of the change. Commercial real estate is not only about buildings. It is about valuation, debt, refinancing, tax revenue, and confidence. If a building is less full, its cash flow weakens. If its cash flow weakens, its value may fall. If its value falls, refinancing becomes harder. If enough buildings face that problem, the stress can spread. That matters especially in cities because office districts were not only physical centers, they were financial structures. And when financial structures stop matching old assumptions, the adjustment can be painful. This does not mean every city center collapses, but it does mean the old urban investment logic no longer feels automatic. That is a major change. Cities used to look like safer bets when office demand felt permanent. Now that permanence is in question. The old city model was heavily work-centered. Now many cities are being forced to rebalance towards something broader. More residential use, more mixed-use development, more neighborhood-centered activity, more local services, more flexible work patterns, more distributed demand. That can eventually make some cities healthier, but the transition is difficult because infrastructure, zoning, real estate finance, tax structures, and district design were often built for the older model. That means the city cannot instantly become something new. It has to pass through adjustment first, and adjustment is messy. Some districts revive, some stagnate, some adapt, some get trapped. This is why one city can look resilient while another struggles. The change is broad, but the ability to adapt is uneven. This is important. The future may not simply belong to the biggest cities. It may belong to the most adaptable ones. Cities that can convert space, retain talent, support mixed use, keep transit functional, make housing more workable, and remain attractive even when office demand is weaker. That is a different kind of urban competition. The question is no longer only, how big is the city? It is, how flexible is the system? Because if the old office-centered model weakens, the cities that survive best may be the ones that can reorganize around a broader daily life, not just around commuting. but around living, building, service, connection, and local resilience. That is a different urban future. Some people interpret all of this too dramatically. They assume cities are over. That is unlikely. Cities still matter because they still concentrate talent, institutions, universities, finance, culture, healthcare, specialization, and opportunity. Those things do not vanish easily, but their internal logic can change. A city may remain important while functioning differently from the past. That is what is happening now. The urban future is probably not city or no city. It is what kind of city, built around what flows. That is the deeper question, and the answer is shifting. Cities no longer work the same way because the old model depended on reinforcing concentration. Workers concentrated, demand concentrated, transit concentrated, retail concentrated, tax revenue concentrated, office value concentrated. That model made cities powerful, but once remote work, housing strain, weaker office demand, and changing daily movement patterns began pulling against that concentration, the old system lost coherence. That is the deeper pattern. The city did not stop existing. Its operating model changed. And once an operating model changes, everything built around it has to adjust. Cities are still here. The towers are still there. The streets are still there. The transit lines are still there. The people are still there. But the system underneath them changed. The city no longer works because everyone moves through the same center at the same time for the same reasons. That is why cities no longer work the same way. Not because urban life ended, but because the old economic rhythm weakened. And when the rhythm changes, the city changes with it.